Hello and welcome to another episode of Linux and Code. Today we are going to continue our series on the Express JSON API by talking about user input validation and sanitation. Let's get started. So as I start up our service here, just kind of want to talk a little bit in general about why you would want to sanitize user input and validate the values that are given to it. And the general rule to follow when you're building an API of any kind that's going to be public or even internal is that you never trust the client that's accessing the API, because you never know if a machine could be compromised by malicious code, or if there's a bad actor, or any other number of scenarios where some client that your application is giving access to is sending malicious payloads to your endpoints and trying to exploit them in ways that you did not intend them to be used. And that could be anything from a DDoS attack that's trying to exploit something to make your server do a lot of work, to people trying to access things that they don't have permission to access. So we're going to kind of go through our existing APIs one at a time and do some things to help clean them up and make sure that the input we get is what we expect. Now this, by all means, will not be perfect security. It will, however, help thwart some basic attacks and will also make our application more consistent in terms of what it does. So I'm looking right now at our index that just has our endpoints right here, and we're going to go in order. So we're going to start with user. Now, user has an index, and it also has 4 subroutes for each of the CRUD routes: create, read, update, and delete. So we're going to go ahead and start with create. Now, what we're going to use to do this input sanitation is actually a package called validator.js, and it has a lot of functions built into it, and more than that, it actually looks to be well maintained. There's another package called Sanitizer that has a ton of downloads but hasn't been updated in about 2 years and is only at version 0.13 or something like that. So it doesn't seem like it's being updated very consistently, and with something like this, new attack vectors come out all the time. So you want to make sure you're using a recent package and something that's being updated at least somewhat frequently. Of course, with any package, you want to do some of your own research, see if there's any reported issues on it, use other people's code with caution. However, it's almost like with auth, where you don't want to necessarily do it yourself unless you're an expert in that field. So this is the package we're going to be using. Another useful tool we'll talk about is npm audit, just to check the integrity of these packages. So all we're going to need to do to install it is actually just right here, just this simple npm install validator. You want to be careful and make sure you get the name correctly. That's another way that packages are commonly hijacked. We're going to close down this service actually to do that npm install. And then once this finishes, we're also going to do npm audit. Make sure no vulnerabilities found, so that's good. A later episode we'll talk about a more advanced auditing program, but not right now. So now let's start up the project once more, and we're just going to go in order like I said. So we're going to hop in here to create under user, and we're going to get that package in. Like we do any other dependency. And now we're going to start validating user inputs. Now here on our create user, we only have one username property that we're checking, and body parser is already making sure that we're getting this as JSON. So we're going to go ahead and we only have to do one validation here. We're going to make a new value that's a constant, that's username, and it's going to be equal to validator.escape. And then this is going to take in body of our request and then the username property of it. And that's going to give us a string back when that is done. And so now we want to use that value. And with ES6, if your username key and value are the same, or sorry, object key and value are the same, you can just use the 1 and it will apply the key and value to the same name. So we can save that. Now we can go check and see if this is working. Come over here. Our previous request looks like, okay, right here. This is where we've made a user before, so let's go ahead and make it Jimmy. But we're gonna also add some characters in here that aren't really friendly to an API. Let's just do that. So this is pretty simple, right? But we don't really care if the user wants to have their username be called script type. We just can't have these characters in here triggering extra JavaScript. So let's go ahead and send this request. And you see this escape value has actually cleaned up all of those inputs that were malicious, which is exactly what we want to see. That means this is what's getting stored. No extra code is being run. That is now somewhat safe, at least to the extent that this package can provide us. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and check what's next. Read. We've done quite a bit in read, so this should be pretty good. So the first thing that we're gonna do when we're in here is import our validator library. I'm just gonna grab that from create, paste that in, save a little bit of time typing it. And then we're gonna start at the bottom with our most specific route first, because it only has one parameter that we need to validate, and that's this params.id. So we're gonna have to do two things for this. One, we're going to need to escape the parameter, and then we're going to make sure it's the format that we want to be able to search by. So first we're going to make a const, and we're going to call it user ID. And we're going to set this equal to our validator and escape and our ID. So now whatever value we've been given is escaped. And then we can say whatever value we've been given is in the correct format. So let's do an if statement. If validator that is UUID, it's a function we noticed earlier scrolling through there, and we're just going to do our user ID. So this is our valid case, but we want a short circuit. So if not this, then we're just going to get out of here. So we're going to return response.status 400, because this is not our fault, this is their fault. And you wouldn't necessarily have to give this much information back to a user if you didn't want to. We're not actually telling them what part of the ID is invalid, whether it's the format or whether the ID just doesn't exist, so I'm okay with this. Let's try a request for that. So we'll head over here to our requests, and we'll get all of our users. Let's just grab an ID. Copy that. And here's our get user. We'll paste our ID in. Now this should return just fine. And it does, we get our user back. But what if we had something in here that ruined the formatting of this? Script. We won't completely fill that out, but you get the point. Non-valid characters. Invalid ID 400. Perfect. So, and you can see our URL got parsed to some interesting things anyway on the server. And we're not actually logging what the validator is doing, but since this isn't getting preserved in the database at all, we don't really care. We just know that it caught that it wasn't a UUID, which is what we wanted. Unfortunately, we are super out of time, so we're gonna have to finish up the rest of read, do update and delete in the next episode. But thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment if there's something else you want to see me cover. Have a great day. Take care.